about language and how we can and do share it. But then I thought, is saying a bunch of obvious stuff about language as a commons, about how language is a free, interoperable, open standard, about how language is derived from a rough consensus among willing participants, about how language has an open infrastructure, and so on and so forth, is that really the best way to talk about language as a commons? So I asked myself, wouldn't it be easier to show what an efficient and flexible commons language is by imagining what language and our use of language would be like if language wasn't a commons? So what would our lives be like if language weren't a commons? Well, first of all, if language wasn't a commons, you'd have to have a license to use language. Language would be proprietary. There'd be lawyers involved. So what would the language EULA, the end user license agreement, what would that license agreement look like? Because you would have to get that agreement at birth. Because you need a license not just to produce language, you need a license to hear language. So your parents would have to agree to the language license for you because you'd be a minor. You wouldn't be able to enter into a contract as a baby. So if your parents declined to sign the agreement, or if they couldn't afford a language license for you, what would your life be like? If you didn't agree to the licensing terms for a language, you wouldn't be allowed to speak it. And furthermore, people wouldn't be allowed to speak to you in that language. Imagine coming here to Japan without a license to hear Japanese. What would happen? Would you be fined? How much? How often would you be fined? Daily? Hourly? Could you be jailed for speaking without a license? How would you ask for a lawyer? If you didn't have a language license, you'd have to go around blindfolded in case you accidentally read something that you didn't have a license to read. Maybe you could get special glasses that could keep out text while letting the rest of the visual field through. Maybe you would be required to wear them if you didn't have a language license. So if you couldn't read things without a license, imagine a world without signs. No street signs, no stop signs, no shop signs. I can almost understand what that would be like being here in Japan since I don't read Japanese. It's almost like living in a world without signs for me since I can't understand them. So if language weren't a commons, somebody would own the alphabet. Maybe several somebodies would own the alphabet. Maybe you'd need to negotiate separately with the consonant people and the vowel people. Maybe they would charge extra to use fancy letters like V. Maybe they would stop supporting the letter V, and you'd have to switch to version V 2.0. Somebody could do that if they owned the alphabet. Maybe it would cost the average person a month's salary to use an exclamation point, but semicolons would have a deep discount because of the lack of demand. So, obviously using a dictionary would be very, very expensive if language weren't commons. You wouldn't be able to lend a dictionary to anyone, they'd be single user. In fact, there probably wouldn't even be dictionaries. It would be too difficult to license the rights to list every word, much less to find them. Motivated religious groups would buy up all the rights to all the obscenities, and you wouldn't be able to swear at all for any amount of money. People would own their own names, of course, so you wouldn't be able to criticize them using their name unless they gave you permission. And how likely is that? They would probably enter into partnerships with people who own the words like bad or terrible, so you wouldn't be able to use those words anywhere near their names. Maybe you could only get a license to use somebody's name if you could prove you already have a license to use the words wonderful and excellent. You certainly wouldn't be able to borrow words from other languages. There would be international trade agreements governing the importation of words from other languages. There would be a limit to how many foreign words you personally could bring into your language through customs. Some languages, words wouldn't be allowed in certain other countries at all. Word smugglers would land boats full of words on the beach in the dead of night so that immigrant communities would be able to speak to each other in their native languages. If you wanted to use a word that wasn't already owned by a giant corporation, you'd still owe licensing fees to the original inventor's heirs, who you would have to track down. And if you couldn't figure out who owned a word, you could risk using it, but the owners might find you someday and sue you. The only words in the public domain would be help and fire. Some companies would buy other companies for the sole purpose of taking competing words out of circulation. One day you'd wake up and find the word vermilion was gone because the guys who owned red bought Vermilion Incorporated. so many alphabetical characters would be already claimed and owned by other languages, people who wanted to make free and open source language versions would be very limited in what character combinations were available. Graffiti would be illegal twice over, once for the damage to property, and once for the unlicensed use of text. If you invented your own word, you'd have to advertise it. You'd have to sell it like a product. Words would be focus tested, and there'd be free samples of new words given away on street corners. Your competitors would obviously not let you use their words in order to find your words, so you'd have to be creative. Expressing any ideas at all would be really hard work, because you wouldn't have the right tools for the job. Most writing would be very dull and flat. You wouldn't be able to enliven your prose with synonyms very easily. A thesaurus would look like a high-end consumer goods catalog, like the Sharper Image or something, because it would try to make you want to invest in a word like fabulous instead of good, or felicitous instead of lucky. Celebrities would try to own and endorse certain words, like, for instance, Paris Hilton would try and own the word hot with 2 T's. You'd probably have several different language licenses. You'd have one license for school language, and one for home language, and one for small business language, and the most expensive one, of course, would be for enterprise language. But if you downloaded a demo version of a language, you'd only be able to use 20 verbs until they replaced every other verb you used with register this language. Lots of beautiful ideas would be trapped in people's heads, unable to get out through language. Most people wouldn't be able to express themselves, unless they were very rich. Sometimes the very rich would learn a different language if that language was cheaper than the one they originally spoke. The very rich would switch dialects for tax purposes, too. French speakers would start speaking Quebecois, etc. Some languages would try to woo rich and influential people to switch to them. The tabloid press would follow this very closely. David Beckham would be paid $5 million for learning to speak Portuguese. So very poor people, especially in the global south, would subsist on 3 or fewer words a day. The World Bank would draw a linguistic poverty line of 1 word of American English a day and report how many people lived beneath it. So does a world where language isn't a commons sound appealing to you? So many things would be difficult or impossible. Imagine having to budget how many times you could say I love you to your spouse or to your child. Imagine reaching your word limit in the middle of an argument, or right before you found out who the murderer was in a mystery novel. Imagine having to decide between Shakespeare or Jane Austen because you could only afford to read one. A world where language wasn't a commons would be gray and empty. Conversations would be flat and stilted. You'd always be trying to figure out how many words you had left. People would be disconnected from their communities. Nobody could afford to say, "How are you doing?" to your neighbors every day. People wouldn't ask difficult questions of their governments, or of anyone, really. There'd be no such thing as a blog, and literature would be sparse. But the Reader's Digest would be more successful than they already are. But forget about a single mother ever being able to save up for enough adjectives to write a best-selling book, much less a series of them. It was pretty easy and pretty depressing to imagine language as property, wasn't it? The trick now is to turn around and try to imagine other property systems as a commons.